Hi, thanks a lot for tuning in. Hope you're getting something out of this, and I hope that some of the talk sessions that I have actually sort of help you and stuff like that. As you can see, I just talk about lots of different things, and hopefully they are of interest, and that they do help. One I want to sort of talk about now is one that I think drives a lot of um, thoughts around depression, and just thoughts generally of how we act and stuff like that. And it's this idea, and I think this is a topic for many videos and a lot of stuff that you go out there for, and it's around that idea of fear. There's lots of things that we fear. Some of them are physical, like myself. I'm scared of heights. It's irrational. It's I don't even know how to describe it other than it is irrational. You know, I think about I've been to some very tall buildings, and they've stood there for decades, centuries, sometimes in some of the cases. Or I've gone to high cliffs, and okay, maybe some people would say that's a little bit more dangerous, but the cliff's been there for millions of years in some cases because it's over, and you're standing there, and in a real sense, you are safe because that building is not falling down that stayed just at that time, just as you're standing there. So, or that cliff is not going to subside or erode in 2 seconds while you're standing there. So it is an irrational fear. There is no cause or alarm. What you're actually afraid of is not the fear of heights, as they sort of say. It's the fear of falling. There was always that joke, not so much around that, but it's not the fall that kills you. It's coming in contact with the ground that's not moving. That actually is the part that kills you. So the falling part is actually the easy part. It's the ground. If they could move the ground, then you'd be fine. But that's not the case. What I'm trying to understand, trying to get to people, is that this idea of irrational fear is a lot of times what drives us. And when you look around, and I'm going through change at the moment, and change is a thing that fear feeds on, because you go into quite a few little modes. You go into protective mode and trying to protect and hoard everything, so that it doesn't change. You can go into catastrophizing, and I've talked about catastrophizing before, where you just sort of end up going down the process, going through all these thoughts and feelings where suddenly the planet is blowing up at the end of it, because of just one small thing is happening. But fear is something that really does drive us. And when you're going through change or you're going through something, there is a lot of fears that you are starting to bring to the fore. There's the fear of losing your social standing. There's the fear of just losing in general. There's the fear of embarrassment. There's the fear of financial loss. There's the fear of what people are thinking about you. So going back a little bit to embarrassment. There's the fear of what your family will think about you. In terms of that one, one example that I sort of think is very prominent, and it's from a movie, but I'm sure, and I mean, a lot of movies are based on some sort of realization, but in one of the things, a movie, 1997, The Full Monty, I do like British comedies, they're quite funny. This one was around, there's a character in there, Gerald, who's got standing in the community because he's a manager, a foreman or something at a factory. And he's lost his job, and he hasn't told his wife, and it's 9 months that he hasn't told his wife, and she just thinks that everything is fine. And so he's dealing with two fears there. One, he's lost a standing, which he can't sort of get over. The other one is the fear of financial failure and him not being able to provide. And then, because he's waited so long now, he's now got the fear of being embarrassed that he couldn't tell somebody about that. And so that drives a lot of his behaviors in that movie. And also, what he does, how he continues to act like he's going to work, how he continues to sort of say yes to his wife for spending, because she knows no different. She has no sort of thoughts that something bad is going on. And so she just continues, and you sort of see at the end when she confronts him with it and sort of says, why didn't you tell me? Because suddenly all the possessions in his house are being repossessed. And she sort of says that, I could have dealt with the shame, I could have dealt with cutting back, but what she couldn't deal with was him not telling her. And so that really sort of puts home that, a lot of these things, a lot of these fears are not something that are real. They do exist. Yeah, I mean, yes, he did have a fear of financial loss and stuff like that. But if he told his wife, they might have been able to cut back. They might have had things to do, change things how they acted. Okay, it's only a movie, so it's not really like. But people out there are going through these things. But if you have that conversation, maybe that fear suddenly isn't realized, and you can take that fear away. That removing that fear will sometimes then remove the anxiety around it, remove the depression, remove the concerns that you have about the other fears that build on top of that. And you can see from that movie and that scenes that he had first a fear of the standing, then the fear of the financial ruin, then the fear suddenly of the shame of not telling his wife. So the fears just compounded, so that in the end he was starting to do some really erratic behaviors and was trying to do the right thing, but he was just getting into a frenzy of trying to get the right thing happening, and move in the right space. But all of those fears were just trying to sort of take everything away from him. And I mean, okay, there's a couple other scenes in there that are around comedic value and stuff like that, but those fears are constantly there for all of us. And one of the worst fears is the one that I sort of talk about is one around financial failure or not being able to provide for your family. That can weigh people down, especially. I think everybody in there, if they have a family or even for themselves, they want to be able to provide. They want to be able to give the best life to their spouse, partner, whatever, to their children. Sometimes even maybe not to their own children, to somebody else's, their nieces and nephews, maybe the next door neighbor's children, because they're really nice to them and stuff like that. Everybody likes to do that. And then I think sometimes the fear of that gets in the way of certain things, and we hide away from it. So a lot of times it's about owning those things so that the fear doesn't have that hold upon you. And I know that's easy to say, oh, yeah, well, what do? You sort of like fear of financial failure. What, I go get a job? You don't think I'm trying? You don't think I want to have that? Or, in some cases that is, that's the case, that you can, and you still want to do that, and you do want to do what's right for everybody. But I'm sort of saying I'm not saying that you're not trying to get a job or something like that. I'm just sort of saying trying to own that and talk about it. Even if you're talking to your kids, sometimes you don't have to tell them exactly everything that's happening and this and that, but sometimes allowing them to understand and sort of say, things might get better, but right now we need to cut back, or whatever it happens to be, or I can't buy you that toy right now. And sometimes you just sort of say, look, bugger it, I'm just going to do that today because that is worth more to me. That happiness for that child or that happiness for my partner is worth more to me than the pain that I might go through that because I don't have that money. And sometimes owning that then allows you to make those choices a lot more, because the fear is not driving those just choices. You are owning those choices, and you can sort of say, yep, I'm going to do that, and I feel comfortable about that. So I think a lot of times with fear, it's about moving it out of the way, accepting it, so that you can actually make good choices as best you can. The fear is not going to go away, but it's going to not maybe drive the decision making that it does normally. So that way you can sort of feel like, okay, I don't have those fear factors anymore. I now have control of the decisions I want to make, and I acknowledge them, and I acknowledge them to other people. So the fear doesn't have something like the shame attached to it or the embarrassment. So that you sort of say, okay, well, if that happens, it's just part and parcel of it. And I know I'm sitting here sort of saying these things. I have been in those situations many times. I remember something recently where, and this is not quite quite the same, but it was fear that drove that. You know, I was sitting there. We sometimes have morning tea at work, and basically I was asked to come up, and you know, normally I sometimes go up, but I've been avoiding it lately. A lot of times I work at home on that particular day. This time I was in the office, and somebody said, "Oh, you should come up." And I was on the step to go up to the next level, and the fear took over. The fear of what would people think of me? The fear of nobody will talk to me. I'll just sit in the corner by myself because nobody really likes me or anything like that. The fear of feeling like I don't belong. All of those fears made me basically take 2 steps, turn around, and go back to my desk and continue working. Fear can strike at the littlest times, and fear can strike at the big times. Um, and I will talk about fear a little bit more because it is something that drives a lot of us. But if we can try and remove it, some shape or form. I mean, when I had that situation, after I'd calmed down, because it's sort of, you know, fear, that particular fear drove anxiety in me. After I'd calmed down, it was basically like, why are you letting that rule your decision-making process? Why did you not go up there? I'm sure there would have been somebody that you could have had a chat to. You could have started the conversation yourself. You could have just listened in. There was heaps of things that I could have done, but just in that moment, fear drove that decision and drove me to turn around and go back, sit down, and continue working. You know, one of the things that my wife sometimes says about those situations is, you know, on two sides, you know, who's going to remember the next day whether you were there or weren't there? And that can go in both ways. Like, you know, if you don't want to turn up to an event because you're feeling, you know, sick or you have got a lot of anxiety, well, nobody's really going to care the next day that you didn't turn up. The next year, nobody's going to remember that you didn't turn up to that event, you know, and you can just turn up to the next one. But at the same token, when you go to something like that, people aren't going to remember the next day whether you were there or not, or that you might have been awkward or something, or even most people will probably try and make an effort to come over and talk to you and make sure that you are okay. And that's where that sentiment comes from as well. Are you okay? So, you know, from a fear point of view, and I know this has only scratched the surface, and this has probably been a little bit more of a ramble than it normally is in terms of where I've gone and what I've talked about. But fear has a way of really getting in and clouding your decision making. So try not to, when you are making those decisions, try to think about what's driving those decisions and whether it is actually yourself or the fear that's talking. And I know that's difficult, but as I've said in other times, sometimes it's not about the first time you do it; it's about the first time you realize that things are happening. Because once you've got that realization, then things can start to change because you've got a little bit more understanding of what's going on. Anyway, hopefully this has been of interest, and you found it of benefit. Hopefully I'll see you again and talk to you again. And all I can say is thanks for listening. Look after yourself and have a good rest of the day.